The night Daniel trusted me most was the night of his father's funeral. He had held himself together through the entire service, through the eulogy, through the burial, through the reception at his parents' house, where relatives he barely knew kept gripping his arm and telling him what a good man his father was. He held it together the way Daniel always held things together, quietly, with a steadiness that looked like strength and was also, I now understand, a kind of loneliness. He asked me to stay with his mother that night, to keep her company so he could go out with his closest friends and finally fall apart somewhere private. He kissed me on the forehead and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And that night, while he was grieving his father, I was with his best friend. Before you judge me, tell me where you're watching from. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I gave up the right to ask for that a long time ago. I'm asking you to stay because this story does not begin the night of the funeral. It begins much earlier in the quiet accumulation of a relationship losing its shape, and the person I became inside that slow erosion is someone I have spent years trying to honestly understand. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are, and stay with me through all of it. Daniel and I had been together for 2 years and 8 months when his father died. We had met at 24 through work. He was in a different department. We crossed paths at a company event, and what began as easy conversation became something neither of us had planned for or tried to accelerate. He was the kind of person who moved thoughtfully through the world. Deliberate. Measured. He didn't say things he didn't mean, which meant that everything he said landed with a weight that felt significant. When Daniel told me he loved me, 4 months in, on a walk along the river, without ceremony or setup, I felt it reach somewhere in me that previous relationships hadn't touched. For the first year and a half, we were genuinely good. Not perfect, we had the ordinary friction of 2 independent people building shared space, the small arguments that are really about tiredness or stress wearing the costume of something specific. But underneath all of that, we had a foundation that felt real. I trusted him. He trusted me. And trust, I believed then and still believe now, is the most intimate thing 2 people can offer each other. It is more intimate than anything physical. It is the decision to leave yourself unguarded in someone's presence. Daniel gave me that without hesitation, and for a long time I held it carefully. But somewhere around the 18-month mark, a change arrived so gradually that I could not locate its beginning. Daniel had been promoted at work, a significant step that brought with it a level of responsibility that consumed him in ways I had not anticipated. He was present in the apartment, but absent in the particular way of someone whose mind is perpetually elsewhere, replaying a work decision, preparing for the next morning, carrying the weight of a role he was still growing into. He was not unkind. He was not cold. He was simply not fully there. And I, instead of naming it directly and persistently, instead of sitting him down and saying this is what I need and this is what is missing, I went quiet. I performed fine. I let the gap between us widen while telling myself it was a temporary season that would pass. I think that choice, the choice to go quiet instead of speak, was the first brick in a wall that would eventually block out almost everything. Luca had been Daniel's best friend since they were 16. By the time I came into Daniel's life, Luca was already part of the fixed landscape of it. At every gathering, every birthday, woven into the stories and the references and the history that made Daniel who he was. He was different from Daniel in ways I had always registered but never examined. Where Daniel was measured and contained, Luca was expansive and immediate. He laughed loudly and spoke without the editing that Daniel applied to almost everything. He paid attention in a way that felt less like thought and more like instinct. And he had, for as long as I had known him, been easy to be around. I want to be careful here about the timeline of my own feelings, because honesty requires precision. I did not arrive at the night of the funeral through a sudden, unexplained collapse of judgment. I arrived there through months of small emotional migrations that I observed and did not stop. It began with a conversation at a group gathering in the spring, 6 months before the funeral, 8 months into Daniel's promotion and the distance that had accompanied it. Luca and I ended up in a corner of someone's garden, away from the noise of the party, talking about something I can't fully remember now, and at some point he said, "You seem tired, not physically, the other kind." I looked at him. What do I? Oh, mean. Like someone who has been holding something for a long time without putting it down. I laughed, the way you do when something hits accurately and you're not ready to admit it. You're reading too much into me standing here. Maybe, he said. I probably am. But he was watching me with a care that felt genuine, and I felt it, and I filed it somewhere I told myself was unimportant. I did not tell Daniel about that conversation, not because it was inappropriate. It wasn't, not yet, but because it felt already like mine, like something I wanted to keep separate. That wanting to keep it separate was the warning sign I did not heed. The text started in June. Not personal at first, just the ordinary communication of two people who existed in the same social orbit and occasionally needed to coordinate around Daniel. But they migrated. The way I have come to understand these things always migrate when two people are paying attention to each other without creating resistance. From functional to easy to warm to something with a particular charge that I was choosing not to name. By July, I was telling Luca things I was not telling Daniel. Not secrets, not confessions, just the texture of my daily experience, frustrations, observations, small moments that mattered. The ordinary intimacy of someone who is genuinely listening. And he was genuinely listening. That was both true and irrelevant as a defense. The intimacy was real and the intimacy was misplaced, and I knew which of those things deserved more weight and chose the other one anyway. Daniel noticed something in August. We were eating dinner, the apartment quiet in the specific way it had been quiet for months, and he looked at me across the table and said, "Are we okay?" The question sat between us for a moment. I put my fork down. "Why are you asking?" "Because something feels slightly off and I can't name it, and I'd rather ask than not ask." That was Daniel. That was exactly Daniel, the direct, honest, slightly awkward approach to something uncomfortable, the refusal to let things accumulate unsaid. The quality I had loved in him from the beginning, still present, still trying. And I looked at my partner of over 2 years, asking me with genuine vulnerability whether we were okay, and I said, "Yes, I think we're both just tired from this year." He studied my face for a moment. "You'd tell me if something was wrong." "Of course," I said. He nodded, went back to his dinner, and I sat across from him and felt the specific nausea of a lie that has been confirmed rather than simply offered. Daniel's father had a heart attack in late September. He survived the initial event but deteriorated over the following 3 weeks, and Daniel's world contracted to the hospital and his family and the particular focused grief of watching someone you love die in increments. He was extraordinary during that period, steady for his mother, present for his siblings, managing logistics while simultaneously managing his own quiet devastation. I was there as much as I could be. I held his hand. I made meals no one could really eat. I showed up, because showing up was something I could do, and doing it felt like a way of being the person I was supposed to be while carrying the thing I had been carrying. His father died on a Wednesday morning. The funeral was that Saturday. I want to tell you about the specific construction of that day, because I think the detail is what makes this feel real rather than abstract, and because I believe in accountability that does not soften its own edges. The service was in the morning. I sat beside Daniel in the front row, and I held his hand through the whole of it. I watched him hold himself together with the specific dignity of someone who has decided to be strong for the people around him, and I loved him in that moment, genuinely, clearly, without complication. I want to say that too, because it is also true. I loved him and I betrayed him on the same day, and those two things are both part of the same story, and the simultaneous truth of them is the thing that took me the longest to sit with. In the late afternoon, after the burial, after the reception, Daniel found me in the kitchen at his mother's house. He was exhausted in a way that went past tired, the specific depletion of someone who has been strong all day and needs to stop being strong. He put his arms around me and said, quietly, "I need you to stay with her tonight. I can't leave her alone, but I can't not be with the guys right now. I need to go be a mess somewhere that isn't here." "Go," I said. "I've got her." He pulled back. He looked at my face with the full, unguarded attention he had always given me when it mattered, and he said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." He kissed my forehead, and he left. Luca had not gone with the others. He had stayed behind, helping clean up from the reception, moving quietly through rooms doing the ordinary tasks of aftermath. We were the last two people awake in the house by 10 o'clock. His mother had gone to bed. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet after a significant day, a heavy, specific silence. We sat in the kitchen and we talked. At first about Daniel's father, memories, specific kindnesses he had been known for, the shape of his presence in the years Luca had known him. And then, gradually, the conversation moved to other things. The way it had been moving for months, across text messages and brief conversations, and the slow accumulation of a closeness I had been allowing to build without addressing what it was. I know there are things I could say here about the particular vulnerability of that night, about grief and proximity and the specific fragility of human beings in the presence of loss. I could make a case for context. I have made that case to myself, in private, many times. And every time I have made it, I have also been able to see the 7 clear decision points that preceded that night. The months of texts. The conversations I kept private. The question from Daniel at dinner in August that I answered with a lie. Every small brick that became the wall that I then stood on the other side of. The context is real. The context does not change what I chose. I am not going to tell you exactly what happened, because the person who deserves the most protection in this story is Daniel, and some details belong only to the people who lived them and the people they wronged. What I will tell you is that a line was crossed that I had been approaching for months, and that I crossed with awareness and without enough resistance, and that what I felt immediately afterward, sitting in a room in his mother's house, in the home of the man who had just buried his father, was a horror at myself that I had no previous reference point for. I left early the next morning before Luca was awake. I drove to our apartment. Daniel wasn't home yet. He had stayed with his brothers. I stood in our bathroom and looked at my own face, and I did not recognize the person I was looking at. Not because I looked different, because I had just fully understood what I was capable of, and the understanding was something I could not unknow. He came home that afternoon, tired and red-eyed and quietly relieved to be back in our space, away from the concentrated grief of his family's house. He hugged me for a long time without saying anything. I held him back. I held him, and I knew that I was going to have to make a choice between truth and silence, and that neither option was going to leave either of us whole. I told him 4 days later. Not because I was caught. No one told him. Nothing surfaced. I told him because I could not sit across from him at dinner, watch him try to return to ordinary life while carrying his grief, and maintain the surface of the person he believed I was. I told him because the person I wanted to be could not coexist with the secret I was keeping, and I had to choose one. I sat him down on a Thursday evening and I told him everything. Not just the night of the funeral, the months before it. The texts. The emotional intimacy I had been building with his best friend while performing presence in our relationship. The dinner in August when he had asked me directly and I had lied. All of it. Plain and complete, without the framing that would have made me look more sympathetic. He went still in the way that I had come to associate with Daniel processing something significant, not explosive, not cold, just a complete suspension of ordinary motion. Like everything in him had paused to focus on what was being delivered. When I finished, he said nothing for a long time. Then, the night of my father's funeral. "Yes," I said. He stopped, took a breath. "While I was with my brothers." "Yes." He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to me for a long time. When he turned around, his face had gone to somewhere I had never seen it go, past hurt, past anger, into something I can only describe as a profound and complete reassessment. Like he was looking at me and updating every understanding he had of who I was. "I need you to leave," he said. "I need you to leave right now, and I need you to give me time." I left. I stayed with my sister for 2 weeks, during which she was kind and honest in the way that only someone who loves you and has no reason to protect your feelings can be kind and honest. She said, "The timing of it, Nadia, of all the nights." "I know," I said. "Do you? Because I think you need to sit inside the specific wrongness of that particular night. Not just the general wrongness of the whole thing, that specific night." I did. I have. I have sat inside it many times from many angles, and I have never found a place inside it that doesn't hold me fully accountable. Here is the secondary thing I had not anticipated. Luca told Daniel before Daniel called me to have the converse. Asian I had been expecting. He told him the full timeline, not just the night, but the months, the texts, the things I had shared with him that I had not shared with Daniel. He offered no defense of himself, no framing that reduced his own role. He gave Daniel the complete account and told him he was sorry and that Daniel deserved to have the information from someone who wasn't going to manage it. I found out about this when Daniel finally called me 3 weeks after I had left. He told me Luca had come to him. His voice when he said it had a quality I couldn't fully read, not angrier, exactly, but different, like the thing he had been processing had shifted shape. "Did you know he was going to tell me?" Daniel asked. "No," I said. "He said it's been eating him alive since the night it happened." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not telling you that to make you feel better about him," Daniel said quickly. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand that 2 people I trusted completely in the same week, in the worst week of my life." He stopped, started again. "I need you to understand what that is." "I understand," I said. And I did. I do. I have understood it fully, and I have carried the understanding without trying to put it down, because I think some things deserve to be carried. We did not reconcile. I want to be clear about that without drama. It was not a fight, not a dramatic final scene. It was a slow, honest acknowledgement from both of us that what had been broken too fundamentally, and in too specific a way to be rebuilt into the same shape. We ended with a conversation, in his apartment, that was the most honest 2 hours we had perhaps ever spent together. And then I left, and I did not ask for anything more from him than what he chose to give. Luca and Daniel's friendship did not survive either. I know that through the peripheral information of shared history, and I carry it as part of what that night cost. 12 years of friendship gone, not because I asked for it to end, but because the geometry of what we had all done to each other made continuing impossible. I am 28 now. I have been in therapy for 2 years, and it has been the most important investment I have ever made in myself, not because it has absolved me of anything, but because it has helped me understand the specific person I was when I made those choices. The person who had been going quiet instead of speaking, who had been feeding a need in secret instead of naming it to the person who deserved to know it existed. Who had told herself, across months of small decisions, that nothing definitive had yet occurred, right up until the night when something definitively had. I think about Daniel often, not with the romanticized grief of someone who wants something back, with the particular, clear-eyed sorrow of someone who understands the full value of what they held and how they handled it. He was a good man. He was a man who asked me in August whether we were okay because he sensed something and cared enough to ask directly. He deserved a partner who said, "Yes, something is off, and here is what it is, and here is what I need." I was not, at that time, that partner. The question I sit with now, and that I want to leave with you, is not whether I was a bad person. I have stopped finding that a useful question. The question is, what do you do with the knowledge of what you are capable of? Because I am capable of this. I have proven that. And what I have chosen to do with that knowledge, the therapy, the honesty, the commitment to turning toward discomfort rather than away from it, is the only answer I have found that feels worth giving. If you are watching this and you recognize any part of the middle of this story, the going quiet, the private emotional migration, the small choices that feel manageable on their own, I am asking you to stop. Not dramatically. Just stop and name what is happening. Name it to yourself first, and then to the person who deserves to hear it. Because the path I walked looks small at every individual step and enormous only when you look back at all of it together. And by the time you can see it all together, you are already standing somewhere you cannot walk back from. Leave a comment. Tell me what this brought up for you, and I will see you in the next one.